This video begins our in-depth look at the different elements that make up an APA reference entry, starting with the author element. I can't cover every possible situation, so looking in the manual and on the APA style website will be necessary. As a reminder, there are 4 elements of a reference entry in APA style: author, date, title, and source. This is the order in which that information should appear in a reference, with some exceptions for missing information. One of the things I see a lot of students struggling with is the punctuation and formatting of reference entries. The big rule of thumb with APA style is that the 4 elements are separated by a period and a space, typically, we'll talk about exceptions later, while commas and parentheses are used to differentiate parts of those elements. We'll get into more detail about formatting as we go, but please refer to the manual and the website for additional guidance. The author is the entity that is responsible for creating the work, whether that work is a journal article, a report, a video, or a sculpture. Authors can be individuals, multiple people collaborating, a group, or a combination of individuals and groups. Group authors are often used when an agency or organization publishes the work under their voice, rather than the individual workers who created it, though they may be credited in some way. The APA manual is actually a great example of a work published by a group. Individual authors are listed by their last name or surname, followed by their first and possibly a second initial, with a period and a space after each of those initials. You include any additional information like suffixes, but not degrees, titles, or ranks. You may also need to include information about an author's role, like if they were the director of a film or if they are the editor of a book. Also, respect the author's preferred capitalization of their names, even if it goes against normal grammar rules. The use of periods after author initials is probably the biggest exception to the guideline that periods separate parts of a reference. Since we use periods after initials in common grammar usage, that rule carries over into the citation style. Many works will have multiple individual authors who collaborated to create them and deserve recognition. If there are multiple authors, you're going to follow the order that the authors' names appear on the work. For 2 authors, you add a comma after the author's first initials and combine them with an ampersand. For 3 to 20 authors, you list out all of their names following the pattern set by the 2 authors. Authors' names separated by commas with an ampersand in front of the final name. It isn't common to have enormous numbers of authors, but APA does accommodate those larger collaborations. For works with more than 20 authors, you will list the first 19 names, add an ellipsis or 3 periods, and then list the final name. Notice that there is no ampersand. APA doesn't give a concrete reason for this, so just go with it. This is something that a lot of citation generators do incorrectly, so double checking their work, handling the number of authors, and just in general is always a good idea. Listing out 20 individual authors can be a lot of work on your part, but people deserve to be recognized for their work, so APA is trying to strike a balance between giving that professional recognition and some concision in the reference entry. Groups like government agencies, nonprofit organizations, businesses, task force, and more can publish information without crediting individual authors. When citing group authors, you spell out the name completely. You do not include an acronym in the reference entry like you can in in-text citations, because the entry has to have the most complete and unambiguous information about the work. Information about any parent organization will be included in the source element later on in the reference entry. For example, if you are citing a report from the National Institute of Nursing Research, the institute is a specific organization that published the report and should be given authorial credit. But since it is an agency under the National Institutes of Health, which is also part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, these parent organizations are listed as part of the source element, similar to a book publisher. I'll go more in depth in another video. If no individual author or group can be determined, as a last resort, you can move the title of a work to the author position in an entry. If a document is signed anonymous, you actually use anonymous as the author. Both of these instances should be very rare, so try to do your best to identify the individual or group responsible for the work. Let's take a look at some examples of author elements in a published reference list. On this reference list, you see many articles with multiple authors. This tends to be the norm for academic research. In fact, we only see one work with a single author. We also see a number of works with group authors. The final example to note is the entry for the Handbook of School Mental Health, which has editors instead of authors and thus has some added notation in the author element. Now we'll look at some examples of finding authors on published works that we intend to cite. So this is a journal article, and for most journal articles, when you see them in a PDF form like this, the author's name should be pretty obvious. It's typically towards the top of the paper, directly under the title. There might be a little bit of formatting differences between different journals, but this one should be pretty obvious. If you are finding that article through the library's quick search or another database, the author's names can be hidden a little bit. Typically on a search result screen like this, they will come directly after the title of the work. If you're actually seeing it in some of the databases, again, they will tend to be towards the top near the title of the work as well. So in this example, we're actually looking at the 2024 Common Read No Ashes in the Fire. And with published books, like physical books, in this case, the author's name tends to be on the title page fairly prominently displayed. When it comes to digital sources, author names can be more and more difficult to kind of find, but there are usually some good indicators. So this is a report from the Pew Research Center, and you'll notice that they actually have some really good formatting on their webpage, and the authors' names are listed again towards the top underneath the date as well as the title of this piece. On news sites, we tend to see, again, reporters' names towards the top. So on this AP story here, we see the title at the top, there's a bit of a hero image, and then just below, but before we get to the body of the work, we do see the reporter's byline. When you get into born digital media, specifically social media, you are going to need to credit the author as the poster. So in this case, this is a video by the Vlog Brothers, so you would use the actual tag instead of John Green's name, for example. Let's take a look at a couple of web pages with group authors, okay? So typically citing something as a web page should be your last resort. You should probably try to see if this is a report or if it's a news article or something instead. But there are some web pages that are just web pages. So this page is from the APA Style site, and it's about bias-free language and how to deal with talking about disability, right? If we scroll down, there really isn't going to be an author's name. We didn't see one at the top, and then as we continue to scroll down to the bottom here, we see some references, but we don't see any individual getting that credit. So in this case, we would need to use the American Psychological Association as a group author. Similarly, with a lot of government websites, you are not going to see an individual author. Typically, you're going to see the agency listed, so the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, that talks about, what is on this page. But again, no individual authors are kind of being listed on this informational page. Thank you for watching. Please see the other videos in this series for more APA content.